in regular hell, but in robot hell. So I'm going to show you a brief clip. Did any of you watch Futurama when it was on? Okay, a couple of you did. Great. Okay, so this is a clip from an episode of Futurama. Bender has left the Church of Robotology and as such has been drawn into robot hell. And I just want you to pay attention to this and think about connections this might have with Dante's vision of hell. Right? How is this similar to the vision of hell that Dante has put forth? And I do just also want to quickly say, if there are any lawyers for 20th Century Fox or for Macaroni listening, this is fair use educational purposes. So don't shut me down. Thank you.
Gentlemen? Crap, singing. Mind if I smoke? Cigars are evil, you won't miss them. We'll find ways to simulate that smell. What the sorry fella, roll them smoke like a granatella. Here on level 1 of robot hell. Gambling's wrong, and so is cheating, so is voting IOUs. Let the lady luck decide what type of torture's justified. Fight the boss here on level 2. Oh, deep fried robots. Just tell me why. This street is 55-page word. There must be robots working on. Check around, there really are. Please let me explain my quadrilateral boyish plan. You stole from Boy Scouts, nuns and bangs. Stop playing me, blame my upbringing. Please stop singing while I'm singing. Selling bootleg tapes is wrong. Musicians need that income to survive. Hey, better gonna make some noise. I'll drive back by the Beastie Boys. That's what you get on level 5. I don't feel well.
It's up to us to rescue him.
Maybe he likes it here in hell.
It's us who tempted him to sin.
Maybe he's back at the motel.
Come on, son, don't be scared. I'm sure at least one of us will be fair. Just sit back and enjoy the ride.
My ancestors from the slide. Facing diamonds, facing cockfights, publishing indecent magazines. You'll pay for every crime. Sneaking in an electric slide. You'll suffer till the end of time. Enduring tortures, most of which crime. Run forever here.
Okay, so first I apologize for the quality of the video, but you get what you're willing to pay for, and I'm not willing to pay for it. So, what do we see here that relates more or less directly to Dante?
We're talking about levels.
Yeah, okay. Bender's sins are arranged in levels here, right? And what's the sin that we start with? Yeah, something really not that big a deal, right? That is maybe, more of a public nuisance if you're doing it in a closed room than anything else. But yeah, we start with smoking, and then what does he punish for next? For, right, gambling and cheating. Right, then,
Not paying his debt.
yeah, for record piracy, right? Selling bootlegs. Fencing diamonds. Pornography, right? So these sins are graded in levels, right? And they seem to get more and more quote unquote severe as we go down until he gets kicked into the electric slime. And what else do we notice? Are these sins, by and large, that Dante would have even recognized? No, these are all really fairly contemporary vices. And in fact, most of us would probably regard a lot of these things as vices rather than as full-blown sins. But what this shows us is how persistent and how pervasive Dante's vision of the afterlife has become, right? That we can adapt it we can adapt these sort of levels of hell going down deeper and deeper and deeper into a pit where the punishments get more and more severe to fit contemporary circumstances. So the Inferno is all over contemporary popular culture. We don't even always recognize it when we're looking at it. How many of you have seen the movie Seven? I guess this is kind of an older movie now because it came out about 20 years ago. God, I was in high school. Shit. All right. Sorry, I just had a moment. But yeah, there's a killer, right, who bases his crimes on these 7 deadly sins and is always leaving behind quotes from, not from the Inferno, but from Dante's Purgatorio, right? The Purgatorio is the one that focuses on the so-called 7 deadlies. The Inferno focuses on those 3 Aristotelian categories of sin. But we're still getting Dante's vision of the afterlife the way it's supposed to be. The songs that I was playing at the beginning of class today, right? The first one, the Rage Against the Machine song, Roll Right. This song is an attack on arms manufacturers and warmongering politicians. And the repeated line throughout the song is, send them to the 7th level. What's the 7th level of Dante's hell? Who's punished in the 7th circle?
The fraudulent?
No, it's not the fraudulent. The fraudulent are in the 8th circle, and then traitors are in the 9th. Who's in the 7th? It's got those 3 concentric rings. The violent, yes. So send those arms manufacturers and those hawkish politicians to the 7th level, the 7th level of the violent. The other song that I was playing for you, the Gaslight Anthem's Navesink Banks, places Dante's hell in the physical world in New Jersey. Actually, so does that little Futurama clip. Hell there is in New Jersey. Now, it cannot be coincidence that so many people place hell in New Jersey. I myself, if I had to put it somewhere in the United States, would probably say, yeah, Jersey fits the bill. Freaking Jersey. Sorry, but like people from Pennsylvania and New York have a serious bug up their ass about New Jersey. We can't help it. Yeah. How many of you have ever played? I'm gonna guess the answer to this is no because this doesn't look like a particularly nerdy crowd. How many of you have ever played Dungeons and Dragons? Okay, that's at least 3 of you. Good. I have, perhaps unsurprisingly, played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons in my life. And one of the planes of existence in the Dungeons and Dragons game is the 9 hells. Right? And each circle is governed by some great big devil monster. And it's the sort of place where sadistic dungeon masters send adventurers who have become too powerful and need something to kick their asses. You may be too young to remember the Guitar Hero 3 video game. Anybody played it? Okay, at least a couple of you have, right? What's the final level? Where does it take place?
Hell.
Hell, or yeah, specifically Lou's Inferno room, right? And then you have a guitar duel with the devil playing The Devil Went Down to Georgia at the end of it, right? So yeah, the vision of hell there also inspired by Dante. I lived in DC before I moved down here. I used to meet my wife every Friday night at her workplace. We go out to dinner and we go browse the local bookstore. And I can pinpoint the exact moment I no longer wanted to live on this planet. I was looking through the poetry section and I saw a book with a very lurid looking cover with all of these monsters and demons all over it in this sort of 3D-ish kind of style. And it was a new edition of Dante's Inferno with, in letters bigger than the title of the book and the name of the author, it said, "The epic poem that inspired the hit video game." So yes, there is a Dante's Inferno video game, and it was being used to try to sell copies of the book. The video game, from what I understand, is not actually all that good.
Super loosely based.
Yeah, it's a very, very loose adaptation. For one thing, apparently Dante can actually save the sinners in hell if he chooses to. Right? Dante is a knight who is trying to free the fair lady Beatrice from the clutches of Satan. So very little to do with the actual poem, except that it takes place in hell and is organized in levels.
It gets people to read it.
I hope it did. I have serious doubts. Yeah, Savannah.
There's also a movie about Dante's Inferno that is exactly like that video game, and trust me, it sucked. I had to sit there and watch the whole thing.
Oh, that makes me
It was
deeply, deeply
horrible.
sad.
Like you said, it's nothing
Uh-huh.
like the actual book itself. It
Yeah.
was just based on levels and
Mhm.
all that. And there was a fight at the end, and it was
Yeah.
apparently he killed the devil, and I was like, oh my god.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, does this seem like it would be an easy poem to adapt into a game or a movie?
No.
No, and why not? What does it lack?
Action?
Yeah, there's not really very much action, right? There isn't very much real conflict.
It's just a bunch of gory details of what he sees.
Yeah, the point of the text is not action, right? Dante is not representing himself here as a hero. He's representing himself as a pilgrim traveling through the various layers of God's creation in order to learn the divine order of things, right? He's not there to change anything or to fix anything.
He's there to observe.
Yeah, exactly. He's just there to. He's really, by and large, he's not a purely passive character, as we see in various incidents. For example, when he promises to break the ice off of Friar Albericio's eyes and then refuses to do so. Right? There are moments when he gets into little scraps with some of the damned down here. Right? But the primary action is conversation. And going through various layers, talking to sinners, learning from sinners about, how they happened to come to this place, who they were in life, doesn't necessarily make for good action movie fodder. And yet, this material has essentially shaped our modern vision of what hell is supposed to look like. Right? Hell is barely mentioned in Scripture. The Jews had no real the Israelites had no real concept of it. There still isn't really a Jewish hell. And most early ideas of hell resembled very much that kind of lightless Greco-Roman underworld with just, spirits flitting about, right? Not much different. Right? Essentially, you go under the earth and are not saved. The idea of hell as a place of fiery torment, well, fiery and other sorts of torment, largely comes from Dante. Now, the name that we tend to give it, take off the second L, in Germanic paganism, hell was the abode of the unheroic dead. Right? People who died in battle went to Valhalla, where they feasted with Odin and the other gods all day, all night, fought with each other all day to prepare for the final battle, and, woke up the next morning to do it all over again. If you happen to die of something shameful like old age or disease, or if you happen to be a woman or a child when you died, then you went down to hell, which was not so much a place of punishment, but you weren't getting any special favors there either. Right, so this is where we get our contemporary name for it from. Now, Inferno comes from Latin. And yet Dante did not write this poem in Latin. I think as we referenced last time, he wrote it in the Italian vernacular. Now, why do you think, I think this is the note we ended on last time, right? Why do you think he wrote this poem in a vernacular language rather than in Latin, as most learned men would have done in his time? Yeah, Jamie.
Because he assumed that's what Virgil would speak in, or writing.
Well, yeah, I mean, Virgil was a Latin speaker, and Latin would have been the vernacular of his time. Yeah, Ty.
Maybe he didn't want the people that read Latin to understand what he was writing.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Maybe he didn't want them to understand what he was writing.
Oh, he didn't want the educated folk?
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to like churchmen very much, right? He seems to be like, for someone who is presenting himself as a devout Catholic, as we noted last time, he doesn't seem to have a healthy relationship with the church. Particularly in that he seems to regard the church itself as sick and sinful. But most churchmen, I mean, like, while they would write in Latin, they would still speak whatever their native language was, right? Whatever their native vernacular was. So what's the idea of writing this in Italian rather than writing this in Latin? What does this do to this text? If he writes it in Latin, who is it for?
Everyone.
If he writes it in Latin, it's for everyone of that educated upper class, right? If he writes it in Italian, then it's for everyone, or at least everyone who can read, right? So there is a much more broadly democratic impulse at work here than we would see in a lot of medieval literature. Dante is one of the first European authors to regard a vernacular language as being worth writing in. Right? To consider a vernacular language a fit vehicle for artistic expression. So he's initiating a trend that will spread across Europe too. Are any of you familiar, for example, at all with Geoffrey Chaucer, the English poet, the Canterbury Tales guy? Okay, a couple of you at least are familiar with the Canterbury Tales, right? So Chaucer does really kind of the same thing for the English language in poetry about a century later. So this is a slow process, but yeah, the idea is to try to bring poetry down to the masses rather than up to the elite, where it was concentrated previously. Now, was there anything in particular that you guys wanted to talk about or you wanted to ask about in this last section? Okay, Ty, that was a really fast hand.
I want to know why, like, the creatures of in Canto 35, 25.
Okay.
I don't know. Like, I want to know why, like, the creatures still in the body of the shades or whatever. Like, why they
Okay, so this is the one with the snakes, right?
Yeah.
And the snakes jump onto somebody, they bite that person, turn to ashes, and then reform in another shape, right? So yeah, so if we look at the people who are trapped here, right? We have this Johnny Schicchi, who's a thief. We have Mira. Do we remember who Mira was? This might help us to figure out what's going on here. Who was Mira? If we think back a couple of sessions, actually, well, probably more than a couple of sessions now. If we think back to Ovid, the Metamorphoses. And people who turned into trees.
Was she the lady that was like she came a tree and like had the baby?
That's her, yep. She turned into a tree, and then her son pushed his way out of the bark, right? why was it that she was turned into a tree? What had she done?
She was trying to get away from Apollo.
Different tree. A lot of women turn into trees in the Metamorphoses. What was Mira's crime? She wasn't not really a thief. She's the one who disguised herself in order to seduce her own father. So these particular sinners are people who took on false identities, right? We see a lot of falsifiers of various sorts in this part of the poem. And yeah, these falsifiers in particular, the people who are getting bitten by the snakes and transformed into ashes, these are people who took on false identities. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, see, I thought that with the whole, like, they're stealing identities, I guess is what I wrote.
Uh-huh.
And, I felt like the reason why I see in Canto, or how do you say it?
Canto.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that.
Mm-hmm.
See, because they say he didn't change in it. He was the only one that didn't change. I was like, maybe because he already knew who he was, I guess. Is what I'm still told.
Who is this that didn't change? Where are we?
It's in the Canto 25. And then
Okay.
furthermore, I'm like,
Okay, can you point to the lines?
on page 1139, I guess, like,
Okay.
where 147 is over there.
Okay. So let's see. The smoke from each was swirling around the other, exchanging colors, bringing out the hair where there was none, and stripping off the others. The one rose up, the other sank, but neither dissolved the bond between their evil stares, fixed eye to eye, exchanging face for face. The standing creature's face began receding toward the temples. From the excess stuff pulled back, the ears were growing out of flattened cheeks, while from the excess flesh that did not flee the front, a nose was fashioned for the face, and lips puffed out to just the normal size. The prostrate creature strains his face out long and makes his ears withdraw into his head, the way a snail pulls in its horns. The tongue, that had once been one piece and capable of forming words, divides into a fork, while the other's fork heals up. The smoke subsides. The soul that had been changed into a beast went hissing off along the valley's floor, the other close behind him, spitting words. Then he turned his new-formed back on him and said to the shade left standing there, "Let Buoso run the valley on all fours the way I did." Thus I saw the cargo of the seventh hold exchange and interchange, and let the strangeness of it all excuse me if my pen has failed. And though this spectacle confused my eyes and so stunned my mind, the two thieves could not flee, so secretly I did not recognize that one was certainly Puccio Scancato, and he alone, of that company of three that first appeared, did not change to something else. The other, he who made you mourn, Gavil. Yeah, I don't know why this guy doesn't change into something else. Maybe there was just nobody there to bite him. But yeah, by and large, what happens here is that somebody gets bitten, they turn into a snake, and the thing that was a snake turns into them, right? So what we see here is people constantly trading identities, constantly trading physical features. One soul gets transferred to another because they refused to stick with their stable identity in life. So yeah, as far as your question goes, I don't really have a good answer for that. I think probably it serves Dante's political purposes to be able to recognize and call out that particular character. It's like, haha, you Florentine jackass, I recognize you. Right? He's often calling out people who were his political enemies. And that's probably what he's doing here. Yeah, Savannah.
Is that why at the beginning of Canto 25, the news to see, like we talked about last time, the devils were the only ones that really rebelled against God. Well, in this line he says that about here, God, I have shaped them just for you, and basically he shaped his fist into figs, which was apparently
this is the figs. It's an obscene gesture in Italy. Yeah, it's essentially figs is metaphorical. It's supposed to look like testicles.
Yeah.
It's the Italian equivalent, the medieval Italian equivalent of giving somebody the finger.
But he was the only one that we've seen actually said something like against
Mhm.
God.
Actually, he's not. If we think back to the circles of the violent, right, there's that guy Capanius, the blasphemer, who's stretched out on the burning sands and who continues to shout imprecations at God, right?
Yeah, but there was only like a few. Mainly it's just people, being content with being in hell for the most part.
I think-
So why these
yeah.
people?
I think content is probably not
Well-
quite the right word, but yeah, but not right, not necessarily rebelling against their condition, right? Not, trying, not fighting back in any way. Yeah, and yeah, you're right. It is weird that this guy does continue to rail against his punishment. And some of it might have to do with just the nature of the character. This is a guy who Dante knew at least by reputation. His name's Vanni Fucci. And Vanni Fucci, in his lifetime, was known as the Beast. And his crime, the theft for which he's punished, is stealing from the treasury of a church. So his actual sin combines theft with blasphemy. But because Dante's scheme actually considers theft as a form of fraud to be worse than blasphemy, which he considers a form of violence, Vanni Fucci is punished for the theft, right? You're always, if you're someone who committed multiple sins in life, you're always punished for the worst one. But you still bear the marks of the other sins on your person in the afterlife. So that's why he continues to blaspheme after he's dead. Anything else? Anything else that struck you as weird or interesting? Yeah, Jamie.
Oh, something I just kind of noticed. It's like, Dante, there's no like gray area. I
No.
feel like even people that commit these sins like for like the right reason,
Sure.
they're still being punished. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Ulysses is down there, and he wasn't like
Sure.
a terrible guy. I mean, everything he did kind of like for his people.
Well, from a certain perspective, Ulysses / Odysseus is a really terrible guy. And that's the perspective Dante's coming from, right? We have to remember where Dante places himself in historical continuity and in tradition, right? Now, whose traditions does Dante regard himself as continuing?
The ancient poets.
Which ancient poets in particular? Which ancient culture does he regard himself as? Romans, yes. He identifies very strongly with ancient Rome. The Romans were the ones who got it right. Now, according to the Aeneid, Virgil's great poem, where do the Romans come from?
Troy.
Troy, originally, right? And who destroyed Troy? Specifically, Odysseus, yes. So that's what makes this guy such a great sinner in Dante's view of things, right? That Odysseus / Ulysses is the guy who is ultimately responsible for the destruction of Troy. Right? So he's another one of these people who screwed the Romans or their ancestors or their descendants. Right? He gets very, very angry about people who did nasty things to the Romans. So we can see, in fact, some references here to Roman values when Ulysses gives his little explanatory speech. If we look on page 1142, around line 90, can I get a volunteer to read starting from when I set sail from Circe? Can I get a Ulysses?
What page was it on?
This is on 1142, around line 90.
When I set sail from Circe, who more than a year had kept me occupied close to Gitty.
Close enough.
But yeah. Not sweetness of a son, not reverence for an aging father, not the debt of a love I owed Penelope. To make her happy, could quench deep in myself the burning wish to know the world and have experience of all men's vices, of all human worth.
All right, thanks. That'll do. Okay, so what was the great Roman value if you were a man? What were you supposed to do? Pardon? If you were a Roman?
Oh,
If you were a Roman man, like the ideal male Roman citizen, what were you supposed to be like?
You were supposed to take care of your aging father before you and raise the child after you.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Remember that image of Aeneas, right, with his aged father on his shoulders, leading his little son by the hand. And what could Ulysses not be constrained by? Right. Not sweetness of a son, not reverence for an aging father. Right. These things could not hold him back from wanting to go out and continue adventuring. So what he does is in defiance of that Roman value of pietas, or duty, right? He doesn't care about his duty. What he cares about is going out and experiencing more for himself. So this is violation of Roman values, 101, right? Abandoning family in pursuit of adventure. And what is it that happened? How did he die? What did he do? Yeah, his ship sinks. Where does it sink?
it seemed like they said somewhere here where he saw Mount Purgatory.
Yeah, he went where man was not meant to go while alive. Right? According to ancient tradition, the Strait of Gibraltar, the so-called Pillars of Hercules, was set to mark the limits of where human beings were allowed to venture. Right? And beyond all of that is what? If you sail beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, what's on the other side of the earth, according to medieval belief?
Purgatory.
Purgatory eventually, right? Is there anything else over there? Any other land? No, it's otherwise supposed to just be water. Now, the explanation that Dante gives for this is that when Satan was cast down to earth in his rebellion, he plummeted into the planet on that side, the side where Mount Purgatory was supposed to stand. And that sent all of the land scattering away into the other hemisphere. So that's where Ulysses has gone. He's gone into that great watery unknown. He lands on Mount Purgatory, the island of Purgatory, and that's where the winds come up and sink his ship and kill him and all of his remaining crew. So he's killed and punished for violating these sorts of prohibitions against pursuit of certain kinds of knowledge. But the worst thing he did, the thing he and Diomedes did together, is the destruction of Troy. And so again, that's what he's punished for. Now, what else is weird about the episode with Ulysses and Diomedes? Who questions them, Dante or Virgil? Yeah, Virgil questions them. Dante is not permitted to speak to them. Why not? Yeah, that's the explanation the notes give, right? And nobody really has a completely satisfactory explanation for why this is. It could be in part because Dante doesn't understand Greek, and Greeks wouldn't communicate with a barbarian. They would disdain him for that. It may also have something to do with where Dante sees himself in relation to tradition, right? As the descendant of the people whom Odysseus and Diomedes destroyed. and sort of thus disdained. But there are sort of pro and con arguments for both of those positions, as well as for a few other positions. This is like Dante scholars, because the poem is so big and so complicated, really, really love minutia. And if you're actually doing any kind of scholarship on this poem, it's really easy to get bogged down in this kind of shit. People often do. But yeah, this is one of those little mysteries of the poem. Like, you can come up with theories, but there's no real satisfactory explanation. Now, what did you guys make of like sort of these deepest reaches of hell? What if we get, once we get to the very bottom, what's there? What's that? I can't hear you.
Fraudulent. Is that what you want?
Well, the fraudulent, we have various kinds of fraudulent in the 8th and 9th circles, right? If we get down to the 9th circle, who's down there? Who's down at the very bottom of hell?
Satan.
Yeah, we have Satan is actually getting the worst punishment of anyone, right? He is sinner number 1 in hell. He's frozen up to his waist in a lake that's made of his own tears and slobber, that is kept encased in ice by the constant motion of his wings. But the people down around him in this frozen lake, what was their crime? Yes, we have betrayal of various sorts. Again, in sort of concentric rings, right? And the worse your betrayal, the more of you is frozen. So we have 4 rings. Right, the outermost ring is Cana, which is for people who betrayed their kin. The next ring, Ptolemy or Antenor, the next one? Right, the next ring actually is Antenora, people who betrayed their country. Ptolemea, people who betrayed their guests, right? Hospitality is still a sacred value, not to be violated. And Utica, in the very center, is for those who betrayed their benefactors. And if we look at Satan himself in the center of all of this, do you notice anything weird or interesting about the way he's described? What has he got? He's got 3 faces. Now, the colors of the faces, this is another one of those pieces of minutia that Dante scholars love to focus on, but again, that nobody can really resolve for sure. So we're going to leave that to the side. 3 faces, 1 sinner in each mouth, right? Now, the most important thing about this really is the number 3, because you may have noticed that the whole poem works in 3s in various ways, right? On the one hand, the Inferno is just one of 3 poems, right? Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, that make up the Commedia together. There are 3 beasts that block Dante on his way up the hill in the dark wood. There are 3 broad categories of sin covered in hell. And Satan has 3 faces, each of which munches on a sinner. Now, how many cantos total does the Inferno have? Trick question. The first canto is actually not regarded as part of the Inferno. It's an introduction to the whole Commedia.
33.
So yeah, there are 33 cantos in the Inferno. Each stage of Dante's journey through the afterlife, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, each has 33 cantos. So a number divisible by 3. Everything here works in threes. Why?
Is that like a dig at the Trinity? Like the Holy Trinity?
Well, it's not a dig at it, but
Is
the
it
go
like-
ahead.
I was gonna say, is it like the pattern that they have in the Bible, where they do things in threes like that?
No, well, I think probably the pattern of threes that we see in the Bible probably has more to do with the origins of a lot of Bible stories in Israelite folklore. And folk tales, fairy tales do tend to work in threes, right? We know that. Myths tend to work in threes. Dante and medieval Catholics are actually less concerned with the actual biblical text, typically, than they are with various points of Greek philosophy. But one of the concepts that distinguishes Christianity from its sister religions, Judaism and Islam, is this concept of a triple God, right? The God in Judaism, the God in Islam are both, unitary deities. It's not a Father, Son, Holy Ghost. It's just God. It's one thing. But the Christian God has this triple identity. So it's not a dig, as you suggested, at the Holy Trinity, James, but you are onto something there. Part of Dante's whole point is that creation is rationally ordered by a divine intelligence, and that if you look at creation, if you try to read creation like a book, you can see the signs of that intelligence. It works in patterns. And so these very patterns are encoded into the shape of Dante's poem. Right? Everything in the poem works in threes because creation for Dante follows this pattern of the Holy Trinity. Everything is modeled on this Holy Trinity. Yeah, Savannah.
So then where exactly does Christian faith get the whole thing with the demons mocking the Trinity? Like if apparently when the houses are haunted by demons or whatever, you have 3 knocks or you get 3 scratches on you or something like that.
Yeah.
Where do we get that kind of stuff from?
Yeah, and I mean, I will say, and this probably won't surprise any of you, that I am someone who's of the opinion that most reports of hauntings and possession are hoaxes, bullshit, or a psychological phenomenon. But yeah, I think that is often sort of something that the hoaxer does, or that the mentally ill person's psyche sort of remembers these particular patterns and acts them out. But yeah, in Christianity, I mean, like, demons are rebels against God's authority, and so will often parody or sort of directly, like, they can't actually destroy creation. They can only mock. They can only encourage human beings to destroy it, and they tend to do so in patterns that mimic this pattern of Dante's. Just as Satan's 3 faces here, right? It's a mockery of the Father, Son, Holy Ghost. So I think it's in that same sort of spirit of parody and mockery. But most of what I know about hauntings and things like that comes from crappy horror movies. So, in each of these mouths, we have a sinner, right? And who are the 3 second worst sinners in hell? Yep. Judas Iscariot, Marcus Brutus, and Caius Cassius. Now, we are all perfectly well aware of who Judas Iscariot is and what he did, right? Betrayer of Jesus. What about Brutus and Cassius? Who were they?
They betrayed Julius Caesar.
Yeah. So you have the betrayer of Jesus sharing after living quarters with the betrayers of Julius Caesar. The first deified ruler of Rome. Right? Why do you think Dante does this?
Proud of that Roman heritage.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be putting it on pretty much the same level as the betrayal of Christ, right? The betrayal of Caesar merits the same punishment, almost the same punishment, as the betrayal of Christ, right? We know that it's not quite the same punishment. Judas is getting it slightly worse. Let's look at the way this is described on page 1170. Right. In each of his 3 mouths he crunched a sinner, with teeth like those that rake the hempen flax, keeping 3 sinners constantly in pain. The one in front, the biting he endured, was nothing like the clawing that he took. Sometimes his back was raked clean of its skin. That soul up there who suffers most of all, my guide explained, is Judas Iscariot, the one with head inside and legs out kicking. As for those other 2 whose heads stick out, the one who hangs from that black face is Brutus. See how he squirms in silent desperation. Brutus was a Stoic. The other one is Cassius. He still looks sturdy. So Judas is in the mouth head first. Brutus and Cassius are in the mouths up to their waists. So there is some slight difference in the punishment they receive, but by and large it's the same. It's in keeping with Dante's valuation of Roman culture above all other things, right? The betrayers of this ruler of Rome are almost as bad as the betrayer of Christ. Anything else that struck you here that you want to... actually, how is Dante's behavior changing as he gets deeper and deeper into hell? Do you notice a change in him? In the way he interacts with these sinners?
He's more cold, sort of. It's like not how cold's not the right word, but
Uh-huh.
he's more just
Distant?
yeah, less than that. Like he doesn't.
Yeah.
It's not that he doesn't care, but he
Mhm.
doesn't.
Yeah, in fact, in some cases, he actually adds to their suffering, right?
Yeah.
There's the one guy he grabs this one head frozen in the ice and he grabs by the hair and shouts at, right? He doesn't feel bad about kicking them. He promises to break the ice from that one guy's eyes and then doesn't do it. Yeah, he starts treating these sinners with a lot less sympathy, right? In ways that we would consider cruel. Does the poem seem to regard him as wrong for doing so? In fact, Virgil has rebuked him in the past for showing too much sympathy to some of these sinners, right? The point of the poem is that these people are getting what they deserve and that you shouldn't feel sorry for them. They're here on their own accounts. They're here for things that they did to be punished, right? This is divine justice at work. You're not supposed to question it. You're not supposed to try to do anything about it or mitigate it, right? If Dante broke the ice away from Friar Alberigio's eyes, then he would be committing a greater sin than he is by lying to Friar Alberigio and moving on. Right, if we look on page 1167, right, at the bottom of it, when the head starts talking to him, he said, I answered him, if this is what you want, tell me your name, and if I do not help you, may I be forced to drop beneath this ice. Is he lying when he makes this promise, or makes this little oath? He doesn't help him. But how is he going to exit hell?
You had to go through there either way.
He's gonna climb down the legs.
Yeah. He's going to have to drop down below the ice anyway to get out. So he doesn't, in fact, actually lie or break an oath here. Right? He's being clever and tricky with the soul to get information out of him. Now, what about the souls themselves? Do we see a difference here in their attitudes? What did a lot of the souls in the upper reaches of hell want Dante to do for them? Yep. Remember us when you go back. Preserve us in your verses. Right? Preserve our reputations on earth. Are the souls he encounters in these very lowest reaches as eager to be remembered?
No.
Yes, some of them refuse to give their names. He has to figure out from context or from other people shouting at them who they are. Some of them explicitly tell him that they don't want to be remembered. Right? When you get down to these lowest levels of infamy, right, it's one thing to be punished for gluttony or for lustfulness or for being a little too hot-headed, right? It's a completely other thing to be remembered as someone who betrayed someone who trusted you, right? By and large, the traitors don't want their identities broadcast. They don't want people in the upper world to remember them. Now, what is it that's special about betrayal? How is it different from other sins? How is it different even from other forms of fraud? Why are these the people who get it the worst? Right? If we look at those three broad categories of sin again, right? What do the sins of incontinence by and large entail? Why are sins of incontinence punished less harshly than other kinds of sins?
It's more emotional than other levels.
Yeah, basically just they're sins largely of weak will, right? You couldn't help yourself. You had to indulge whatever this particular physical or emotional passion was. So the sins of incontinence result from weak use of reason, right? Your reason wasn't enough. Your God-given rationality wasn't enough to stop you from doing these things. The sins of violence. How does reason come into these?
Maybe you should reason that God gave you to do bad on others, have more on others.
Yeah. This is reason turned against others, specifically to hurt. Right, this is why, for example, that river of blood where the violent against their neighbors are located is guarded by the Minotaur, half man, half bull, and the centaurs, half man, half horse, right? They represent this combination of human reason and bestial savagery. Now, when we get to these sins of fraud, here we have use of reason to deceive others. And this is regarded as the worst. Now, why would betrayal be the worst form of fraud, the worst form of deceiving other people?
Maybe because, like, for it to be betrayal, the other person trusted you. And
Yeah.
trusted you to be the reason why.
Exactly. Betrayal is a violation of trust that someone or something else has placed in you. And you smiled in their face and betrayed that trust. And what this then does, what this then leads to, is the breaking of communal bonds, right? If we look at all of these, betrayers of kin, betrayers of country, betrayers of their guests, betrayers of their benefactors, right? If there's no trust, there's no community. And what do we know about Dante's relationship to his own community?
He was exiled.
Yeah, he was exiled unfairly for a crime he didn't commit.
So they betrayed him.
Yeah, so he regards his countrymen, his fellow Florentines, as having betrayed him. So one of the reasons this probably ends up at the very bottom here is that this is something he has himself experienced. He has actually been a victim of this breaking of community bonds. All right, so this has been a lot over the last 3 days to throw at you. You guys have actually done really, really well with a really kind of difficult and in some ways alien poem. We're about out of time. Does anybody have any last questions or comments before I let you go? All right, so I have reading questions for you for next time. We're going to be moving to Japanese drama. Which also deals with unquiet spirits and ghosts. And just make sure that before you go, I get your in-class writing. Oh, I do have in-class writing from last week to get back to you. And we'll see you next Monday.